Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here and to share this space with such an exemplary group of thinkers. Well, we live in a world of many voices. We're surrounded by them. Voices that clamor for our attention, that offer us ready-made moral identities, and voices that foist upon us particular visions of change that want to bring us along with their cause. And these voices are constantly shifting and changing. Add this flag to your social media profile, add this hashtag to a post, tag these types of things, these types of people, vilify that group, and embrace this one. Not literally. These are lovely people over here as well. It's a constant cacophony of change, a multitude of voices that are attempting to direct the right and the wrong. And this chorus of voices championing these causes rarely offer any opportunity for deep personal reflection before the next one emerges and the most recent one fades into collective obscurity and the cycle begins again. And as a result, I would suggest that we are suffering from a crisis of an ability to hear our own voices, to consider what change we wish to bring about. So in our brief time together this afternoon, we'll explore an old idea, that genuine change can only arise through the cultivation of our inner voices, something like wisdom or moral intuition. Let's do a little bit of time traveling. And reading can be like that, going back to old ideas. We'll go back about 2,500 years to ancient Greece. Xenophon, who was a classical Greek philosopher and historian, was reflecting on his teacher Socrates. Now, you may have heard of Socrates. If you haven't, Google him, fascinating guy. He liked to stir the pot amongst the ancient Athenians, and he was charged with actually introducing dangerous ideas and corrupting the youth. And for this, he stood trial and was executed by drinking the hemlock. Now, Xenophon is reflecting on his teacher in a conversation that he may have overheard Socrates having, and he says this: "It seems clear to me that just as those who do not exercise their bodies cannot carry out their physical duties, so those who do not exercise their characters cannot carry out their moral duties. They can neither do what they ought to do, nor avoid what they ought to avoid." And I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes unpacking this because there's a few interesting things going on in this passage. To begin, we note the similarity that he draws between the two things. Exercising one's character is similar to physical exercise, which means there are things for the character which we can do to improve it, to kind of get it moving in the right way. Something like wisdom yoga or sit-ups for the soul. And I'll come back to this in a minute, but let's just note it for now. The next thing for us to note is that in drawing our attention to the similarity, Xenophon is also highlighting the contrast. Both the physical body and our character need to be exercised so that they can perform well. But he implies that the type of exercise appropriate to each will be different. Otherwise, he would have just said, do these stretches, this much cardio, this type of strength training, and your physical body and your character will be taken care of. But he doesn't. In fact, in the Western tradition, and in many others, there's always been a distinction that there needs to be a differentiation between the physical body and the character, or what the Greeks and many other traditions call the soul. And this contrast, I would argue, is quite important because in our world, it doesn't always exist. Many of the voices promoting personal change today are overwhelmingly focused on the physical. And that's correct, to a point. There are step-by-step exercise programs, specific plans and diets, health shakes, health regimens, and these are kind of presented as guaranteed methods for self-actualization, for fulfilling our potential, for making changes in our lives. But curiously, they miss character. And it's interesting to me, and I think we should all consider this, that despite the upsurge in the well-being and happiness industries, right, and they are industries because they generate billions of pounds annually, it would seem to me that we aren't any happier or less anxious or less despairing as individuals or as societies. In fact, by some measures, things have gotten a bit worse. And I just want to be clear that in drawing this contrast, what I'm not saying and what Xenophon's not saying is that physical exercise is unimportant. The ancient Greeks held both physical health and the inner health of the character to be absolutely fundamental, and they were equal. More than that, they saw them as bound. They saw them as interconnected. And it's not a surprise that the ancient Greeks gave birth both to the Academy and to the Olympic Games. In fact, it's fairly self-evident, and as we heard through a number of the wonderful talks this afternoon, eating well, getting good sleep, regular exercise, having good physical habits is going to be complementary to the development of character and vice versa. And it seems to me that it's sort of a chicken and an egg situation. The issue is that in our world, we have celebrated the Olympic Games over that of the Academy. And this brings me to Xenophon's overall point. In order to distinguish between what I should be doing from the things that I should avoid requires the development of character, some type of wisdom, moral intuition, the soul, the inner voice. In other words, to bring about genuine change is to foster the inner voice, to exercise the character in a way that is similar to, but is not to be confused with, the exercise of the body. Through this exercise of the character, we can develop wisdom, a moral intuition, that gut feeling. You can sharpen that. And through this, we may be able to navigate how we should live and how we may bring about real change, both in our lives and then the world. So how do we do this? How do we develop wisdom, this moral intuition? What does exercising your character look like? Well, I'm going to propose 3 things, and I'm by no means an expert. 1 is silence. 2 is solitude. And 3 is reflection. We start with silence. We have to embrace it. How else will we be able to hear our inner voice in the midst of such clamoring noise? Fostering silence requires removing all unnecessary noise in active intentionality. Pursuing silence quiets the noise and can help us begin to discern our own voice from that of the crowd. This isn't always comfortable. In fact, at first, when we begin to practice it, it can be unsettling, having become so familiar with the surrounding noise. 2, solitude, learning to be quiet on our own. So much of our identity is shaped by others, provided to us and foisted upon us. Søren Kierkegaard, a 19th century Danish philosopher, wrote that being in the constant noise of the crowd, whereby our identity is formed by the shapeless masses, is in fact the worst form of despair that a human can find themselves in. And embracing solitude provides us with the space to throw off these constructed identities and come face to face with ourselves as we are in all of our weakness, vulnerability, and potential. How else can we know what we really desire? How else can we know what we should do if we can't be quiet in solitude? And I'm under no illusion here. It's not easy. It's difficult. It's scary. And it's hard. 3, we need to engage in reflective practices. Regardless of your religious tradition or cultural background, this is foundational. For some, it may be a form of prayer or meditation. For all of us, I would suggest it should include reading and reflecting on the great texts of our particular and shared traditions. A meditation, a reflection, a solitude. Again, none of what I've just sketched is easily won, and again, I don't pretend otherwise. Developing your inner voice so that you may know what you should do and avoiding those other things is very much like physical exercise. Getting started can be challenging, so start small. It requires discipline, but like physical training, exercising your character, creating that space, does become easier in a certain regard with time. What happens as a result of exercising your character through an active engagement with silence, quieting the chorus of voices, embracing solitude in thoughtful, reflective practice? We know that physical training leads to tangible benefits, but what about training the inner voice? Again, this is by no means exhaustive, but I will suggest 3 things that might emerge in your life. 1 is focused universality, the 2nd is love, and the 3rd is sacrifice. First, your inner voice will lead you to focus universality. And what I mean by this is that it will give you a vision for the specific and the general. It will enable an identification with what is directly in front of you and with what is beyond. An alignment between your desire for your community and what exists in the world. For example, a longing for justice when you think about your family and friends and neighbors will also be present in your longing for the world. Second, it will lead to a genuine love for the other, a love that does not seek its own, that does not operate in the logic of capital exchange, that does not hope or expect reward. It's a type of care or empathy for the other. And the third thing that you might find emerging as you exercise your character is that it will require sacrifice. The inner voice, when fostered, that leads to universality, empathy, and care, will often demand a personal sacrifice, regardless of the choice that you ultimately make. Let me close with this. Following your inner voice is dangerous. It's very dangerous. Throughout history, it has led a great many people through suffering and even death. Most of us, and for this we should be genuinely grateful, will not literally face death. We will not actually have to drink the hemlock of Socrates, or face execution, or be driven from our homes, or be subjected to imprisonment, as so many men and women have in their pursuit through the ages of the inner voice. But in following your inner voice, you will face many little deaths. you will find yourself at odds with a world that demands attention, that voice upon you their voices of change. And so as we leave here today and re-enter that very noisy world with these constant voices of change, I would suggest that we keep this question before us. Whose voice and what change? Thank you.